I didn't realize my son only visited when he needed something, until the day I stopped giving it. For a long time, I told myself that wasn't true. I told myself he was just busy. That life gets complicated when you're building your own world. That people don't always have time to visit as often as they used to. And I believed that. I really did. Because the alternative felt too heavy to hold. My name is Robert. I'm 71 years old, and I live in the same house my son grew up in. It's a quiet place now. It didn't used to be. There was a time when the walls felt too thin for all the noise inside them. Toys scattered across the living room. Shoes left in the hallway no matter how many times I asked him to put them away. Laughter coming from the kitchen while dinner burned just a little because we were too busy talking. His name is Daniel. And for most of his childhood, I was the center of his world. I remember Saturday mornings the most. He used to wake up early, earlier than I ever wanted to, and come into my room, already full of energy. "Dad, are you awake?" I would pretend to still be asleep sometimes, just to hear him say it again. "Dad?" Eventually, I'd open one eye and sigh like it was the hardest thing in the world. "What is it? Can we go outside?" It didn't matter what the weather was like. Rain, cold, even those gray mornings when the sky looked like it had no intention of clearing up. He always wanted to go outside. So we did. We'd stand in the backyard with a worn-out baseball glove, throwing the ball back and forth. He wasn't very good at first. He missed more than he caught. But he tried. And every time he managed to catch it cleanly, he'd look at me like he'd just done something incredible. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," I'd say. "That was a good one." Those were simple moments. At the time, they didn't feel important. Now, they feel like everything. As he got older, things changed the way they always do. Less time in the backyard. More time with friends. More time behind a closed door. But even then, there was still a connection. He still came to me. For advice. For help. Sometimes just to sit in the same room without saying much. I remember the first time he asked me for money. He was in his early 20s, just starting out. "Dad, I'm a little short this month," he said, standing awkwardly in the kitchen. "Just until I get paid." It didn't feel like a big deal. That's what parents do. I didn't even think twice about it. "Of course," I said. "How much do you need?" He told me. I gave it to him. And that was that. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Over the years, those moments became more frequent. It wasn't always money. Sometimes it was help fixing something in his apartment. Sometimes it was advice about work. Sometimes it was something as simple as borrowing a tool he never returned. And every time, I was there. Because that's what I had always been. The person he could count on. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. And I didn't notice it right away. That's the strange thing about change. It rarely happens all at once. It's quiet. Gradual. Almost polite in the way it rearranges your life without asking permission. At first, I just noticed that he didn't come by as often. Then I noticed that when he did come by, there was usually a reason. "Hey, Dad," he'd say, stepping into the house like it still belonged to him, which in a way, it always would. "Do you have a minute?" And I always did. I always had a minute. We'd sit at the kitchen table. The same table where he used to do his homework. Where he once spilled juice and cried like it was the end of the world. Now he sat across from me, a grown man, talking about things I didn't always fully understand. Bills. Deadlines. Problems that seemed bigger than the ones he used to bring me. And then, somewhere in the conversation, it would come. "I was wondering if you could help me out with something." It was never direct. Never demanding. Just familiar. And I would help. Every time. Because saying no never really felt like an option. Not to him. Not to my son. There were still moments, though. Small ones. That made me think everything was still the same. He'd laugh at something I said. Or stay a little longer than he needed to. Or tell me a story that had nothing to do with needing anything. And I held on to those moments more than I probably should have. Because they felt like proof. Proof that nothing had really changed. But slowly, even those moments became less frequent. The visits got shorter. More focused. More purposeful. He didn't linger the way he used to. Didn't sit around just to be there. And I started to notice something else. He almost never called without a reason. When my phone rang and I saw his name, I felt something warm in my chest. That didn't change. But the conversations. They followed a pattern. A quick greeting. A brief update. And then, eventually, the reason for the call. It became so familiar that I started to anticipate it. I'd find myself waiting for that moment in the conversation when things would shift. And when it did, I'd respond the way I always had. With understanding. With patience. With help. Because that's what fathers do. At least, that's what I had always believed. One afternoon, not too long ago, he stopped by unexpectedly. I remember because it felt different. There was no call beforehand. No warning. Just a knock at the door. When I opened it, he was standing there with a small smile. "Hey, Dad." "Hey," I said, surprised but happy to see him. "Everything okay?" Yeah. I was just in the area." Just in the area. It sounded casual. Normal. And for a moment, I let myself believe it. We sat in the living room. Talked about nothing in particular. The weather. A game that had been on the night before. Things that didn't matter, but felt important because we were sharing them. I remember thinking, this is nice. This is how it used to be. And for a little while, it really did feel that way. But then, there was a pause. A shift in his posture. A small hesitation in his voice. And I felt it before he even said anything. "Actually," he began, "there was something I wanted to ask you." Of course there was. I nodded. "Yeah?" He explained the situation. Something about a payment that had come up sooner than expected. A temporary problem. Something that would be sorted out soon. "I just need a little help to get through this week," he said. I listened. The way I always did. And when he finished, I did what I always had. I said yes. Because that's what I had trained myself to do over the years. Not consciously. Not intentionally. But through repetition. Through habit. Through love. After that, he stayed for a little while longer. But not as long as before. Eventually, he stood up, checked his phone, and said he had to go. "Thanks again, Dad," he said on his way out. "No problem," I replied. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space where he had been. And something felt different. Not wrong. Just different. I walked back into the living room and sat down. The chair across from me was empty again. The same chair he had been sitting in just minutes before. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that I hadn't allowed myself to fully form before. When was the last time he came over, just to see me? Not for help. Not for anything specific. Just to be here. I tried to remember. I really did. But the answer didn't come easily. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not completely. Not all at once. But enough for me to feel it. Enough for me to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was something I hadn't been willing to see. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. Not in a loud or overwhelming way. It didn't keep me up at night or follow me around like a shadow. It was quieter than that. It just lingered. Like something sitting in the corner of your mind, waiting patiently for you to look at it. Over the next few days, I went back to my routines. Mornings with coffee at the kitchen table. Afternoons spent fixing small things around the house that didn't really need fixing. Evenings with the television on, more for the sound than anything else. On the surface, nothing had changed. But I noticed something different in the way I thought about him. Every time my phone rang, I still felt that same instinctive warmth when I saw his name. That didn't go away. But now, there was something else layered underneath it. A quiet question. What does he need this time? I didn't like that thought. It felt unfair. It felt like I was reducing our relationship to something transactional. And I didn't want to believe that. So I pushed it aside. Told myself I was overthinking things. Told myself that being a parent means being there when your child needs you. And that's true. It is. But there's a difference between being needed and being the only reason someone shows up. A week passed before I heard from him again. This time, it was a call. I was in the garage, going through a box of old tools I hadn't used in years, when my phone started ringing. I wiped my hands on a cloth and picked it up. Hey, Dad. Hey. How are you? There it was. A simple question. And for a moment, it caught me off guard. I'm good, I said. Just cleaning up a bit. We talked for a few minutes. About nothing in particular. Work. Traffic. Some new restaurant he had tried. And for a brief moment, it felt normal. Like the old rhythm had come back. Like maybe I had been wrong. But then, just as I started to relax into that feeling, it happened again. A small pause. A shift in tone. I actually wanted to ask you something. Of course. I listened. This time, it wasn't money. It was something else. His car. It had broken down, and the repair was going to take a few days. I was wondering if I could use your car for a bit, he said. Just until mine's ready. It was a reasonable request. A simple one. And I could hear the hesitation in his voice, like he was aware of how often he had been asking for things lately. But he still asked? And I still said yes. Of course, I told him. Come by whenever you need it. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it. I knew he did. That was never the issue. He wasn't ungrateful. He wasn't careless. He just had gotten used to me being there. Always there. Later that afternoon, he came by to pick up the car. I handed him the keys in the driveway. Just bring it back when you're done, I said. Yeah, of course. There was a brief pause between us. The kind that used to be filled with something more. Conversation. Comfort. Connection. Now it just existed. He nodded, got into the car, and drove off. And I stood there watching him go, longer than I needed to. The driveway felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with the missing car. That evening, I sat in the living room, the house quieter than usual without the faint sounds of movement from the garage or outside. I looked around at the familiar space. The same furniture. The same walls. The same life I had built over decades. And I thought about how much of that life had been centered around him. Around being a father. Around being needed. It's a strange thing, getting older. People don't really talk about this part of it. They talk about retirement. About slowing down. About having more time. But they don't talk about what happens when the role you've spent your whole life living starts to change. When being needed is no longer the constant it once was. I didn't feel angry. That's important to say. I wasn't sitting there thinking he was doing something wrong. He was living his life. The way he was supposed to. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something between us had quietly shifted into a pattern I hadn't fully acknowledged before. A few days later, he returned the car. He knocked on the door this time. When I opened it, he handed me the keys with a small smile. Thanks again, Dad. No problem, I said. We stood there for a second. Neither of us quite sure what to do next. Everything okay with the car? I asked. Yeah, it's all fixed now. Good. Another pause. He glanced over his shoulder, like he was already halfway out of the moment. I should probably get going, he said. Right. He turned and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away again. And this time, I didn't stand there as long. I closed the door and went back inside. The house felt the same as it always had. But something inside me was becoming clearer. That thought I had pushed away before. It was harder to ignore now. I sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where so many conversations had taken place over the years. And I tried to remember the last time we had sat here without a reason. Without an ask. Without something needing to be solved. I couldn't. And that realization didn't hit me all at once. It settled slowly. Like dust. Quiet. Unavoidable. I looked at my phone on the table. And for the first time, I didn't feel like picking it up. Didn't feel like checking it. Didn't feel like waiting. Because I already knew. The next time it rang, the pattern would continue. Not because he meant for it to. Not because he didn't care. But because that's what our relationship had become. And maybe, just maybe, I had allowed it to become that way. That night, I lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. Not restless. Not upset. Just thinking. About all the times I had said yes without hesitation. About how easy it had been to give. And how, over time, giving had quietly turned into expectation. Not his expectation. Mine. I had expected something in return. Not money. Not favors. Just presence. Connection. And maybe that's where I had gone wrong. Because I had never said that out loud. Never made it clear. Never allowed there to be a different kind of balance. I had simply kept giving. And in doing so, I had slowly taught him that I would always be there in that specific way. No matter what. Sometime during the night, I came to a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not something that felt like a turning point in a movie. Just a small, quiet decision. The kind that only matters because it changes something inside you. The next time he asked for something, I wasn't going to answer the same way I always had. Not out of anger. Not out of resentment. But out of a need to understand what our relationship actually was. Without everything I kept adding to it. And that thought stayed with me as I finally closed my eyes. Not heavy. Not painful. Just certain. Like something had finally come into focus. And I knew, the next time he came by, things would be different. The next time he called, I knew it before I even picked up. Not the exact reason. Not the exact words he would use. But the shape of the conversation. The rhythm of it. It had become familiar enough that I could feel it coming. I was sitting in the living room, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor in long, quiet lines, when my phone lit up on the table. His name. For a moment, I just looked at it. Not with hesitation. Not with dread. Just awareness. Then I reached over and answered. Hey, Dad. Hey. How are you? There it was again. That question. And this time, I didn't rush past it. I'm okay, I said. Just taking it easy today. Yeah, that's good. We talked for a minute. Maybe two. Small things. Safe things. And then, I actually wanted to ask you something. Of course. I leaned back in my chair, not tense, not defensive. Just present. What is it? He explained. Something about work. A delay? An unexpected expense. He needed a bit of help to get through the next couple of weeks. As he spoke, I noticed something in his voice. Not just the usual hesitation. Something softer. Almost like he was aware of how many times this conversation had happened before. When he finished, there was a pause. The kind that waits for an answer. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there for a moment. Not to make a point. Not to make him uncomfortable. But because I needed to hear my own thoughts clearly. I don't think I can help this time, I said finally. The words felt strange. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. There was a quiet on the other end of the line. Longer than usual. Oh, he said. Just that. No frustration. No argument. Just surprise. I'm sorry, I added. I just can't this time. Another pause. Yeah, okay, he said. His voice had changed slightly. Not cold. Not upset. Just different. We stayed on the line for a few more seconds, either of us quite sure how to move forward. Well, he said eventually, I'll figure something out. I know you will. I should probably go. All right. Talk to you later. Yeah. The call ended. And I sat there, phone still in my hand, waiting to feel something. Regret. Guilt. Relief. But what I felt instead was quiet. Not empty. Just still. Like something that had been shifting for a long time had finally settled into place. That evening, the house didn't feel as heavy as it usually did. It was still quiet. Still the same walls, the same rooms, the same memories. But the silence didn't feel like something I needed to fill. For years I had been holding on to a version of our relationship that no longer existed. Trying to recreate it. Maintain it. Protect it. And without realizing it, I had shaped something else in its place. Something that looked like connection, but was built on habit, on expectation, on always being the one who said yes. Saying no didn't break anything. That was the part that surprised me the most. The world didn't shift. He didn't disappear. Nothing dramatic happened. It was just different. The next few days passed quietly. No calls. No visits. And for the first time, I didn't find myself checking my phone every few minutes. Didn't feel that pull to see if I had missed something. I went about my days the way I always had. Coffee in the morning. Small tasks around the house. Walks in the afternoon. But there was a difference in the way I moved through it all. Less waiting. More presence. A week later there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, he was standing there. Daniel. He looked the same as always. Maybe a little more tired. But there was something else in his expression. Something I hadn't seen in a while. Hey, Dad. Hey. For a moment neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. Come in. He walked into the house, slower than usual. Like he wasn't quite sure how the space felt anymore. We went into the kitchen. He sat down at the table. The same table. The same chair. But this time, it felt different. Not because of what had changed around us, but because of what had changed between us. How have you been? He asked. And this time, he meant it. I could hear it. See it. I've been all right, I said. Just taking things as they come. He nodded. We sat there for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just quiet. I wanted to come by, he said after a while. Not for anything. Just to see you. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I wanted to let that moment exist without rushing past it. I'm glad you did, I said. We talked. Not about problems. Not about money. Not about anything that needed fixing. Just life. Small things. Memories. Things we hadn't talked about in a long time. At one point he laughed. Really laughed. The way he used to. And for a moment, I saw the boy he had been. Still there. Just older now. Before he left, he stood by the door for a second. Hey, Dad, he said, a little more quietly. I didn't realize. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I know, I said. And I did. Because I hadn't realized it either. Not until I finally stopped trying to hold everything together the way I always had. He nodded. Then he left. And this time, when I watched him go, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had shifted into a place that made more sense. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same way I had done countless times before. The chair across from me was empty. But it didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like space. Space for things to change. Space for things to grow in a different way. For most of my life, I believed that being a good father meant always being there. Always saying yes. Always giving whatever was needed. And for a long time, that was true. But what I didn't understand was that sometimes, being there means stepping back. Sometimes, love isn't about holding on tighter. It's about letting something breathe. Letting it become something new. Something more honest. My son didn't stop loving me. He didn't forget me. He just grew into a life where I wasn't the center anymore. And that's not a loss. It's a change. A quiet one. A difficult one. But not a broken one. Now, when the phone rings, I still feel that same warmth. That hasn't changed. But I no longer wait for it the same way. Because I've learned something I didn't expect at this stage of my life. Love doesn't disappear when it changes form. It just becomes quieter. Simpler. More real. And sometimes, it takes saying no to finally understand what was there all along.